My name is Jim Murphy from the US EPA Regional Office out of Boston. I'm just quickly going to turn it over. I just wanted to call everybody to order. I'll be moderating various parts of the program over the next 2 days. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I just want to introduce Alexandra Dunn, who is our regional administrator, and she's going to do the welcome.
Well, thank you, Jim, and good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you here at Exeter High School. Thank you so much for being a part of the first ever community engagement event on per and perfluoroalkyl substances, commonly referred to as PFAS. I want to welcome all of our community activists who are here tonight, all of our state and local officials, and particularly want to welcome the staff from our host state congressional delegation, Carrie Holmes and William Henkel with Senator Hassan's office, Peter Clark with Senator Shaheen's office, and Ashley Mata with Congresswoman Shea Porter's office. We really appreciate the support of your members here in New Hampshire, and we know that we have representatives of other congressional offices across New England here, so we welcome you as well. I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight and thank Administrator Pruitt and our EPA headquarters team for being here and giving EPA New England the opportunity to host the first community engagement event. The administrator has been personally involved in planning this event and wishes he could be here with us today. He asked me to convey his wishes to you, and we will be updating him on the outcome of these next 2 days as soon as Wednesday. That shows he really wants to know how things went, and we are ready to deliver. So this week's events follow the unprecedented national summit held in Washington, D.C. in May. And I'd just like to refresh the actions that Administrator Pruitt committed EPA to taking at that event. And you might see some posters around that actually reiterate these. There are 4 key areas that were identified at the National Summit that EPA is focused on. First, EPA will initiate steps to evaluate the need for a maximum contaminant level, or MCL, under the Safe Drinking Water Act for PFOA and PFAS. We will convene and are already convening our federal partners and examining everything we know about PFOA and PFAS in drinking water. Second, EPA is beginning the necessary steps to propose designating PFOA and PFAS as hazardous substances through one of the available statutory mechanisms under the Superfund law. This is very important because it will give EPA additional authorities to order cleanups and also to be reimbursed for EPA costs incurred in handling cleanups of these substances. Third, EPA is developing groundwater cleanup recommendations for PFOA and PFAS at contaminated sites, and that task will be completed by this fall. Fourth, EPA is taking action in close collaboration with our federal and state partners to develop toxicity values for 2 additional compounds in this chemical family, Gen X and PFBS. We anticipate our work to be completed by this summer. So what is tonight? Tonight is our opportunity to take some very proactive steps to engage with all of you, to formally engage the public around the development of a national plan to manage PFAS. New England is setting the stage, no surprise, for the nation. We are about 1 month from the national summit that was held in Washington, D.C. And here we are tonight, taking clear action, hearing from all of you, and providing our input so that EPA can make a difference in this area. You wouldn't be here tonight if you weren't aware that PFAS is a group of man-made chemicals that have been widely used in everyday products since the 1940s. However, like many chemicals in our environment, we have now been detecting PFAS compounds in groundwater and in soil, and it's raising concerns about the potential environmental and public health risks. So across New England, every New England state has been affected by PFAS. We are finding it in firefighting and training areas, at manufacturing facilities, at landfills, and in additional locations. And all of you are here tonight because you either want to learn more about this issue or you have been impacted in some direct way by PFAS. It may have been detected in the groundwater where you live. It may have become part of your job to better understand this and to actually work on solutions. It may have been identified near an industrial site near you. It may have affected people in your family or your neighbors. And that's why we're here tonight. You are here to tell us about your experiences. We are here to listen. Tonight, your voices will not only be heard at the EPA New England regional level, but at a national level. New England states, New England communities are definitely out front on this issue. I really want to commend our state partners for all of their hard work. And I stood up and told Administrator Pruitt that I believe the communities in the New England area are some of the most experienced and thoughtful when it comes to addressing these issues. And that's why it was such a perfect place to come and hold this first event. Our states have been tremendous partners. Our congressional colleagues have been tremendous partners. Our localities and water systems have been partners. We've been taking a New England approach, which is, yes, there's a problem, and yes, we will work together to find solutions. As we continue through today, where drinking water is impacted, we know people are concerned, and it's incumbent on all of us to find solutions and ensure that communities have access to clean drinking water. We are not far from the Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire. This has been an example of partnership and community effort. There is more work to be done, much more work to be done, but we are making progress. As you know, EPA has issued lifetime health advisories for PFOA and PFAS in drinking water, but we do not have all the answers tonight when it comes to managing other PFAS compounds and detections in other types of environmental media. That's part of why we're here, again, to engage all of you in this collective understanding, information gathering, and management process. We want to be supportive, we want to be responsive. EPA New England has been providing significant technical assistance to our states, including at our lab in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, analyzing and sampling groundwater samples and mapping areas to obtain more complete understanding of issues as they affect communities here in New England. We have regular communication with our community groups, and we coordinate a working group of state environmental officials so that we can relay the most current information to one another and learn from each other. Following my brief remarks, which I should make brief, my colleague Peter Gravett is going to dive just a little deeper on the national efforts happening on the PFAS matter. Peter has been asked by Administrator Pruitt to be the lead for PFAS at EPA headquarters. Peter is a longtime career official, an expert in the groundwater and drinking water arena, head of the Groundwater and Drinking Water Office in EPA's Office of Water in Washington, D.C. It's a real privilege to be here with Peter. As I said, we have some very active and well-organized community groups, and before we open the floor for public comment, we're going to be hearing directly from these groups to give us a little more context and insight. We really look forward to hearing from you tonight, and hopefully many of you can be with us tomorrow. We created lots of space in the agenda for networking, for meeting one another, for exchanging information, for making this much as interactive as we can be in an auditorium that doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. I know we're going to have a productive meeting. I look forward to working with all of you. It's a privilege to be here with you all tonight. We know it's a tough issue, but in New England, we've never shied away from tough issues, and Administrator Pruitt is ready to take this on. With that, I'd like to invite to the podium Dr. Peter Gravett from the EPA Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water to address a bit more about what's happening on this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alex. It is a delight for me to be here with all of you this evening. I have spent quite a bit of time in this part of the country. My in-laws live in Newburyport and have been in Amesbury, and so I've spent many, many summers with my children here at the beach and spending time in this area. And I have to say, as a parent and someone who raised his son and his daughter in part in this area throughout the summers of their lives, I appreciate how important it is for us to be here with you, how important this issue is for your families. And as Alex said, as the director of the National Drinking Water Program at the US EPA, in my view, there is no place and no thing I could be doing in my job that's more important than being here with you this evening. So Administrator Pruitt, as Alex said, has directed the agency to lead on this issue, and he has given me the honor of coordinating that effort. But this is not just about drinking water. It's about reaching across every program in EPA with a focus in particular on making sure that we are providing the tools and the information, all the best tools and information we possibly can to you and your neighbors and your families in communities where you live and similar communities all across the country who have been challenged by PFAS issues. Alex made reference to the National Leadership Summit that we held in Washington, D.C. last month. We were joined there by over 40 states and tribes and coordinated that effort along with all the different aspects of the federal government who are working on PFAS issues. And we recognize that you all deserve and have every reason to expect that you're going to get a coordinated effort across the federal government to help support the needs that you have. So I want to thank Alex and her team and thank all the states who are here for organizing this event and for all of you for coming to this event to share your perspectives. So one of the things that I said at the opening of the National Leadership Summit to the groups who were gathered there was that the best ideas rarely come from Washington on challenges like these. And that doesn't mean that we're sitting back and waiting to hear from you before we act. The work on PFAS that the administrator has put in place is all about action. And Alex highlighted the 4 things the administrator committed to in the National Leadership Summit, which span issues related to groundwater contamination and contaminated site cleanup, which I know, or I suspect, that I will hear from you are very, very important issues in your communities. But there's much more beyond that that's happening now at EPA under the administrator's leadership, including focus on developing the tools to analyze for these many, many compounds. We often talk about PFOA and PFAS, and I suspect that many of you are well aware that these are 2 of a family of compounds that really spans thousands. We're also focused on developing cleanup tools. So when compounds are found in drinking water at contaminated sites, communities have the tools at their disposal, at the ready, to help address these challenges and address the contamination. And so we have some sense of the broadest set of issues that are important to focus on related to PFOA and PFAS. But what I have to say that we need most of all right now is an appreciation of how this plays out in your own community, in your own towns, in your own families, and what it means for you, and what we need to do at EPA to work across the federal government and with our state partners to meet those needs. That's why we're here. That's what this meeting is all about. This is not the only community engagement session we're having. It's the first, and Alex said it's appropriate that we be here in New England for the first, but we're also going to be in North Carolina, and I suspect that many of you have heard about a compound called Gen X that has been a real challenge in the Cape Fear watershed. We're going to be in Pennsylvania, in central Pennsylvania, addressing issues there. We're going to be in Colorado, in the Security Widefield and Fountain communities of Colorado, to address challenges they've had with PFAS and drinking water. We're going to be in Kansas and other places beyond. And this is all about hearing from communities and making sure that as we develop our national management plan for PFAS, that we have forefront in our minds the challenges that you're facing, the help that you need, and that we're organizing our activities around those issues. So I, for one, while I know this is a very difficult issue that you're facing, I, for one, am very grateful to be here, very grateful for you all coming, and very grateful for all of those of you who have signed up to speak tonight. And this is just incredibly important for us. So I want to add, because I know that a number of you have probably heard in various ways, maybe read in the press, some comments about another report from another part of the federal government, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which is a part of CDC. Some of you know that they recently put out a report just last week, a toxicity profile on a number of PFAS compounds. And one of the things that perhaps you did not read as much about in the press is how closely we have been working with ATSDR. And we're joined this evening by Bill Saboulis from ATSDR in Atlanta. And Bill, I wonder if you might be willing to come up and just say a few words. You weren't on the agenda, but I thought it would be great if you might say a few words about the important work that you have done at ATSDR through the development of the draft toxicity profile, and just reflect a little bit on your perspectives on this as well. So please welcome Bill Saboulis from ATSDR in Atlanta.
Thank you, Administrator Dunn, and thank you, my good friend Peter Gravett, for this opportunity. I want to recognize that I'm not here alone. I'm here with my colleague, who many of you know, Captain Tara Summers. Tara is the Region 1 Director for ATSDR. Her office is in Boston, and I'm sure that many of you in the communities have had an opportunity to work directly with Tara and our staff in Boston. This is a really great opportunity here. Many of you who have worked with ATSDR recognize that we have always put communities first. We recognize that we need to hear from you, and this listening opportunity that we have, we're very excited to be here, both Tara and I, and just listen and take in what is of most concern to you. So thank you very much for this opportunity to come. Before I mention something about the tox profile, I did want to say, I've been in government a long time, as have my colleagues here, and in my 30-plus years, I have never seen the federal family come together on an issue as we're coming together here on PFAS. Two agencies here tonight, EPA and ATSDR. We're one of 15, 16, maybe 24 agencies that are really working hard on this issue, along with our state counterparts and then the locals. And I think we're making some real progress on this. So let's all continue to work together. So Peter has asked me to just say a few words about the ATSDR tox profile. An 800-page document came out last Thursday. It's our assessment of all of the human health, epidemiologic, animal toxicity data, exposure data available on 14 PFAS substances, right? So as Peter had indicated, there's thousands of these substances. Our document talks about what we know about 14 of them. including PFOA and PFAS, which are the most well-studied. In our tox profiles, we've developed over 200 of these over the years. I'm sure many of you have seen them. One of our responsibilities under the Superfund mandate is to develop health guidance values, which we call minimal risk levels. And so in our document that was released last Thursday, we had 4 of these numbers released. We had updated numbers released for both PFOA and PFAS. And for the first time, 2 new numbers generated for perfluorohexane sulfonic acid and perfluorononanoic acid. So for the first time, those 2 numbers have come out. I think we all wish that the data were better than it was. It's interesting because, as I said, we have an 800-page document out there. There have been lots of studies. There continues to be 20 to 25 new studies that come across our desk every week. But the data is still somewhat uncertain. And so the way we use these numbers is that when we are working in communities, when we estimate exposures to these substances, if we estimate exposures to come out sort of less than these numbers, well, we feel pretty good from what the data tell us right now that we don't think that there will be any appreciable risk of harm to the communities. On the other hand, as I was saying, this is not a bright line here. These are not regulatory actions. They're not necessarily thresholds. We're not saying that exposures estimated above our minimal risk levels are to be associated with health effects. For us, what it means is we need to look more closely at the community. We need to look at what else they're being exposed to. Are there concerns about nearby industries? What are the other people being exposed to? Other PFAS substances? Are there other sources of exposure? Our fish an issue here. So for us, again, those numbers for us, when we see exceedances above those minimal risk levels, then we look much more carefully at the community. And again, I wish, and I think we all wish, that the data were more certain. We certainly support our colleagues at EPA and their responsibilities to provide guidance on public drinking water systems and the EPA Lifetime Health Advisory. We certainly support. And we also support the states. Many of you know that there's probably 8 or 9 states that have already come up with guidance levels for their drinking water systems. And I think we're all working on this as diligently as we can. We wish the data were more certain, and we wish we could say there is a bright line at this time, but we're continuing to evaluate the data, and we're working closely with you and others to provide as much assurance and as much certainty as we can. And with that, again, I'm here to listen, Tara's here to listen, and we want to hear from you, and it's very important to the work that we're doing in communities. The last thing I wanted to say, in addition to the tox profile, another important activity that ATSDR is engaged in that I think most of you have heard about is that we are beginning planning for a multi-site study nationwide that will look at this issue from an epidemiologic point of view. Our protocols are just starting to be written and developed right now, so stay tuned as you'll hear a lot more about this in the near future. So again, thanks very much, Peter, and thanks, Regional Administrator.
Thank you so much, Bill, and I appreciate your reflecting, as I did, on how important this is for us to work together across the federal government. So I will close my portion of the presentation here by reflecting again that this issue is very, very important. This issue is very personal. I know we're going to hear a lot about that tonight. And as Alex recounted, first thing back on our agenda when we return to Washington is to sit down with the administrator and say, here's what we heard in Exeter, New Hampshire over the last 2 days. He is a man of action, and he's expecting that we're going to be taking action to address the concerns that you have in this community and your communities across New England. So I'm going to turn it over to the next stage here, where we're going to have some presentation from some community leaders, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So thank you again for welcoming us here this evening.
Thank you, Peter and Alex. Just a couple of housekeeping things again. So again, I'm Jim Murphy from the EPA office in Boston. So we're expecting to have a pretty busy 2 days of community engagement. And, you know, I appreciate everybody's patience as we move through the program. Just a couple of things I wanted to let people know, or remind you to turn off your cell phone. I haven't heard one cell phone the whole time, so I think it's a very experienced audience knowing to do that before anybody even tells you. I want to ask that anyone who hasn't registered, when you get a chance, either during the break or at some point when you want to step out, to just register, just so we know who's here tonight. Restrooms, I think probably everybody passed them, but if you go out this door, or the main door, they're down there to the left. Emergency exits, they're very well marked. There's at least 4 of them here. There may be another 1 or 2 that I can't see. So take a look around. Anyway, so the rest of our program, we've had this part. Now we're going to move into our community presentations for an hour. And following that, we will have an open microphone period where anyone can get up and speak. We had asked people to pre-register, so we are going to have a system where we're going to call up people by numbers. I think people have numbers, and we'll stick with that the best we can. We'll obviously accommodate if there are some breaks and there are people who had numbers and they're not here, we can call up some other folks. But I think it should work well, and we're looking forward to that section of the evening. But right now, I just want to invite up the members of the community groups who are going to make presentations tonight. And I'm actually not sure if there's stairs on that side or if you have to come up this side here. But the people that we're going to hear from are Elena Davis from Dover, New Hampshire, Stephen Seymour from Barnstable, Massachusetts, Jillian Lane from Greenland, New Hampshire, Kristen Mello from Westfield, Massachusetts, and Loreen Allen from Merrimack, New Hampshire. I don't know if David is here. Okay, good. I hadn't seen you. You must have arrived after I came up here. And David's from Bennington. So we have those 6 planned presentations. So if folks wouldn't mind coming up now. And we're going to invite everybody to come up and sit at the table. The person who is presenting will come over to the podium. And while I'm here, I just wanted to recognize one other person that I saw come in, who's Loreen Nearing, who is been a community leader from Air, Massachusetts, who has worked on the Fort Devon site for 20 years or more. Is not doing a presentation tonight, but I'm sure we'll be talking during the open mic part of it. So Elena is going to come up first, and then the speakers will just introduce the following speaker. So, and we'll take it from here. And it's a privilege again to have all of the community groups up here. You know, these are the most active people really in New England, and EPA really couldn't do our work without them. So, with that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elena Davis, and I'm from Testing for Peas out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I want to first thank everybody for coming, and for Regional Administrator Alex Dunn for helping us organize this, along with Jim Murphy and everybody that's here tonight. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go through our presentation first, and I think I'm doing this right. Let's see. Is it on? Oh. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. So, again, my name is Elena Davis, and who is Testing for Peas? Testing for Peas is a community action group whose mission is to be a reliable resource for education and communication while advocating for a long-term health plan on behalf of those impacted by PFAS water at the former Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And this is myself, Andrea Amico, and Michelle Dalton. So why did we form? In May 2014, a newspaper revealed that PFAS contamination was discovered in the 3 wells supplying water to the Pease International Trade Port, which was formerly the Pease Air Force Base. one well, the Haven well, tested at over the EPA, PHA's provisional health advisories that were in place at that time, and PFAS was the highest in that well and resulted in the well to shut down, and that was at 2,500 parts per trillion. All of our families, Michelle, Andrea, and I, were impacted by the contamination on Pease. A little bit of history about the Pease Air Force Base. In 1956 to 1991, it was a Strategic Air Command base. There's over 4,000 acres of land with 3 wells, Haven Well, Harrison Well, and the Smith Well. In 1999, there were about 4,500 total employees on Pease. That consists of active duty military, civil service workers, and non-appropriated fund employees. In 1990, the military personnel began leaving the base as it became a BRAC site, and Pease Air Force Base closed. And then in 1991, Pease was designated as a Superfund site. So Pease Business International Trade Port started developing in 1991, pretty much right as it was closing. Again, there were 3 wells on the base that supported just the Pease, and that's still the case. Currently, the Pease International Trade Port is home to over 250 businesses, 2 large daycares, restaurants, healthcare facilities, healthcare offices, multiple colleges, a golf course. Almost 10,000 people work on Pease on a daily basis. And it's also home to a Portsmouth International Airport, and I've actually flown out of that airport myself. So how is Pease contaminated with PFAS chemicals? Pease drinking water became contaminated from the use of AFFF firefighting foam during the time when it was open as an Air Force base. It's also known as aqueous film-forming foam. It was used by the Air Force starting in the 70s. 21 areas were identified where AFFF was used, stored, or released on Pease, and AFFF was used and is used because it's the most effective foam in putting out petroleum-based fires. So what PFAS are detected in the Pease water? First detections at Pease were in April and May 2014. 3 of them, there were many, but the highest were the PFAS at 2,500 parts per trillion, PFOA at 350, and PFHXSS at 960 parts per trillion. Multiple other PFAS were also detected at different levels, lower than those 3. The community is concerned about all the PFAS that are in those wells and in the drinking water, despite the lack of health advisories on all those wells. So there's a timeline that begins from the time that it was the contamination was discovered, but it kind of jumps to 2015 after Andrea Amico had started advocating for blood testing after finding out about the contamination on Pease. And a blood testing program was opened after a long advocacy from the community and Andrea. And anyone who was exposed to the contaminated drinking water prior to 2014 was eligible when the well closed. So almost 2,000 people have had their blood tested to date. During that year, the Community Advisory Board was formed. It was established through the City of Portsmouth, which Pease is in the City of Portsmouth. And 14 community meetings were held between May and December of 2015. The EPA also put a strict order on the Air Force to clean up the PFAS contamination at Pease during that year, and they agreed to remediate all 3 wells on Pease. Initially, they just agreed to remediate the Haven well, but the Smith and Harrison well were added to the list. And the Pease community also met for the first time with ATSDR at one of the CAB meetings and discussed forming a community assistance panel, which is also known as a CAB. In 2016, some of the highlights were their blood testing results revealed elevated levels of PFAS for members that were tested. ATSDR recruited, informed, and established the Community Assistance Panel. The U.S. Air Force recruited and formed the Restoration Advisory Board, also known as the RAB, and quarterly meetings are held for that that are open to the public, and that's primarily focused on the remediation of the wells. EPA also in this year lowered the provisional health advisories for PFAS and PFOA down to 70 parts per trillion combined. It was lowered down from 600 parts per trillion combined for PFAS and PFOA. And 2 large GAC filters were placed on the Smith and Harrison wells at Pease. And for those of you who don't know what GAC is, it's a granularly activated carbon vessel. In 2017, ATSDR released a feasibility assessment through our work with them, and other community members work with them through the CAP. We're discussing and meeting quarterly and have monthly calls regarding possible health studies that we can do for impacted community members. And also, U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen successfully included an amendment in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, authorizing DoD to fund a nationwide study on impacts of PFAS contaminants. The ongoing remediation efforts are still going at Pease by the Air Force to clean up the groundwater. They have several efforts in that area, not just in the wells, but also in the airfield area. The PFAS conference that was organized by community members and other agencies at Northeastern University in Boston, and that was a great conference. We were able to pull in several community members from other parts of the United States through the funding that was provided by the grant. And we had community groups, scientists, policymakers, and many people involved in PFAS come together and collaborate. It was a great 2-day conference last year. The formation of the National Coalition was a result of that conference. So the National Coalition is a group of community members that are impacted by PFAS contaminations, and we have monthly calls and update each other and work on strategies in helping deal with our contaminations. So that brings us to 2018. U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen was successful also in appropriating the funding for the multi-site PFAS study, and that will be conducted by ATSDR and its affiliates. And ATSDR also announced that Pease, through the hard work of our community and our work with the Senator's office, will be one of the first to be studied in the health study, because we have a feasibility assessment showing that we're a good candidate. Andrew Amico, which is Testing for Pease TFP co-founder, was lucky enough to attend the EPA National PFAS Summit in DC, and she had a personal meeting with Administrator Scott Pruitt prior to the summit. And U.S. Senator Maggie Hassan also recently spoke at a briefing in DC, and she was highlighting the need for the concerns in protecting our drinking water here in the community. Both U.S. Senator Hassan and Senator Jeanne Shaheen have been very active from the beginning when the contamination was discovered. So the challenges we have faced, obviously these are unregulated contaminants, so communities that have been exposed are concerned about them. There are a lack of provisional health advisories for anything other than PFAS and PFOA, but there's still many other PFAS in the drinking water. Along the way of the past few years, the communities definitely had to advocate at every level. It started with Andrew Amico in 2014 at a public meeting where the contamination in the well being shut down was discussed, and it continued over the next few months until other community members like myself and Michelle Dalton became involved and started advocating for more action. So essentially what we were finding was that government does move slow. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And so we realized pretty quickly that we needed to be seen as critical stakeholders in the process. We also think that we should have medical monitoring with limited support at the state and federal level. That's been a challenge to try to get that implemented. We also have run into roadblocks with physicians. My personal physician, other people's personal physicians don't have any experience or education on these chemicals, so they don't know what to say to us in terms of the impacts that it might have on our health. Lack of funding is also a major roadblock in terms of testing and making decisions for the public safety at the state and federal level. We've also run into inconsistent messaging from different government agencies. Some agencies say that everything's very inconclusive. Others say that you shouldn't get your blood tested at all. It's not recommended. But yet there are scientific studies out there that point to needing to protect the most vulnerable. So we feel that those two things are very important. There's also a limited number of labs capable of testing water and blood. That was a challenge for us when we were starting to get our blood tested. There's only 3 labs that we had access to, one being the CDC. And so the blood samples had to be shipped out in batches of like 400 at a time. So it was a long process to try to get the results because they were waiting until they had enough and then they were shipping them out and then the analysis and everything. So. And then there was also difficulty streamlining the communication between all the agencies in the community, and that's one of the most important reasons why we started as a community group in order to make sure that we could facilitate that process. So the positive aspects, obviously New Hampshire has had a lot of positive aspects, and we're very grateful for that. We've had a lot of engagement and collaboration with other PFAS impacted community groups across the United States. We've developed relationships with multiple government agencies, local and federal, and multiple elected officials. Some aren't in term anymore, but they did help us while we were at the beginning stages. There's a GAC treatment on 2 of the Pease wells with ongoing remediation efforts. Those are the 2 wells that are still open on Pease, so we do have a granularly activated carbon system on those wells. We've worked with many highly respected doctors, epidemiologists, scientists, and environmental health experts to try to understand what the impacts of these chemicals have on our health. We've had the opportunity to apply for grants to try to support our efforts. Atsdr is now, through the efforts of the community and Senator Shaheen's office, we're able to establish a multi-site PFAS health study, and that's really, this is the first of its kind, so it's really amazing that this is going on for us and the rest of the country. And the media has definitely been critical in raising awareness and promoting accountability. That's one of the reasons why this became such a prevalent issue in our areas, because Andrea had discussed her concerns with the media, and it really put it on the forefront of what was going on for us. So that's the end of our presentation, and we want to thank you for listening. This quote is a quote that I actually, years ago, never knowing that it would actually have relevance to anything else in my life, was something that I used when I started educating people about environmental toxins in their personal care products. And so when I started advocating for the Pease community, it really rang true here. And it's by Margaret Mead, and it says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So thank you. Sorry, I was supposed to introduce Stephen. So this is Stephen Seymour. He's from Green Cape from Barnstable, Mass, and he's going to be presenting next.
So you just go over there and hit it? Or? Do a tap with this. Oh, there we go. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. This is Main Street, Hyannis on Cape Cod. Some people may be pretty familiar with that. I'm not sure. But I worked on that street for about 32 years as a civil engineer, and got to really enamored of the place. It's a real kind of American town, and is part of the town of Barnstable, but it's a village called Hyannis. And I want to give you a sense of this whole coastal community and how critical clean water is to our entire way of life down there. It's not just our personal health, which is very important, but our tourist economy, our fishing industry, everything we do. That okay, I kind of switched that too quick. INO was in there, and he was, Cape got settled in the 1600s, and Hyannis was named after Chief INO of you know, back in the 1600s. But anyway, make a long story short, on that, this is some more of Main Street. It's the Cape's hub of transportation, commerce, tourism, year-round population, just shy of 50,000, triples to 150,000 in the summer, and for special events like the car show on Father's Day on Main Street, we'll draw 100,000 people to Main Street. And that's a lot of people drawing on the water system. And they're here going to the Cape for recreation, restaurants, beaches, boating, fishing, and to see such sites as the JFK that's over there, which I probably should point out to you. That's the statue, and the museum and trail. And for now, many of them are unaware just how unique our water system is and how vulnerable it is. Let me switch to the next slide. I'm going to do this, right? Oh, I'll get this yet. Oh, there we go. That's the, this is an EPA, all of Cape Cod is designated by the EPA as a single source aquifer. And what that means is that there's no other viable source of drinking water. When I first came down to the Cape 32 years, or probably 35 years ago now, that was the first thing that I saw was maps of the groundwater. And it's essentially critical. And it would put, the Cape has been, had pollution on different parts of the Cape, and that can like really make things go downhill very quickly. The Cape is essentially a sandbar for the most part, not completely. Anything spilled on the ground percolates through the sand into the groundwater, and the groundwater can travel a foot a day on Cape Cod through the sand, and the water table in some places is less than 10 feet below the surface of the ground. Whatever gets dumped on the ground could contaminate the water in just a couple of weeks, really. And the Hyannis water system supplies the most densely populated residential and commercial areas, and water is obtained from 11 groundwater wells. This is the, we are also an environmental justice area. A lot of people think everybody's wealthy on the Cape. Well, this is not the case in Hyannis and very parts of it. And if you're not familiar with the environmental justice communities, green is if environmental justice population based on income and the number of minorities. Yellow is just based on income, and brown is based on just the amount of minorities in that area. These people can ill afford, they are their own water system. They can ill afford the $7 million that they've had to pay to date, some of which we've gotten recouped for them, added to their water service fees. This is 1959, and the Fire Training Academy on Cape Cod, this is the opening day. And there are at least 3 PFAS contaminated sites on Cape Cod, and there could well be more. But I'll discuss the 2 in the town of Barnstable. And this is number 1 on that list. What is this, like 50 years or so of AFFF going into the drinking water, and firefighters getting exposed themselves to the contaminants. Let me, I did get some of these slides from Angela Gallagher, which I have to give credit to, at Mass DEP. And this is one of them. And this is the fire training facility. This is where I guess I'll need to try to use the pointer. Oh, here we go. Yeah. And this is what is called the hot spot, but the whole area has become contaminated with PFASs, including this pond over here, Flint Rock Pond, who nobody really knows exactly how we're going to clean that out or how it's going to be cleaned out. We have, to some degrees, dealt with the hot spot. This is another slide from her that shows the this is the Fire Training Academy. This is the Barnstable Fire Training Academy right here. These are what we call the Mary Dunn wells, because this is Mary Dunn Road in here. These were the first ones that we found were contaminated, and this is the direction of flow of the water down there. I don't know, did I make that jump? I don't know. I'm sorry. Oh, the arrows, okay, all right. And the next one is we started putting in some GAC treatment and early on, even when we found out about the first, what was going on there. And we also bought water from neighboring districts for Hyannis. And this is a soil excavation on the of the hot spot, and taking about 300 tons of excavated PFAS contaminated soil and brought it to a aligned landfill in Massachusetts with a board of, a bill of lading attached to it. And this is showing that effort to try to slow things down. These are some of the levels that were found of the PFAS in July of 2015, and this was with the GAC system installed and working as of July of 15, and that was just the first GAC system. This is another location right near there, and it's the Maha well field, and these are down by an airport. And let me, a little bit of trouble with this. Anyway, let me point this out. Oh, I'm doing it again. These are the runways right here going like that. And they trained with and had to use during flights, AFFF. And that is going to this Ma well system. So in other words, the Hyannis water supply department ended up without essentially any water of their own at that point. And they had to take desperate measures, and in 2016, when the level went down to 70 parts per trillion, I saw some of the guys there, and they said, everybody stopped work. It was May, of course, right, and the season starting, Memorial Day is coming up the end of that month. Everybody stopped what they were doing and just worked at paying for and getting more GAC filters out there in order to clean up the water. And I do want to say that the town of Barnstable has done a very good job for a lot of reasons in jumping on things really quickly and getting it done. Fortunately, they have a pretty talented engineering staff there. The other thing I wanted to end on this. This was on the Boston Globe, one of their inserts, and this is not good, obviously, for Cape Cod to be seeing in the Boston Globe. This isn't good for anybody to be seeing that. And then, and one of their quotes in this article was, when you live on what's essentially a sandbar, pollution, septic systems, and political roadblocks add up to one tough challenge. I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges that we are facing and what we need to get done. We have some access to what the water test results are, and the ones in Hyannis this year in their water quality report were really good. I mean, some of them were down to 6 parts per trillion. I just wanted to say that, with all this effort and money they spent. But it would be good to get more access to more what the levels are as time goes on throughout the year. We'd also like to obtain blood testing. You've heard that a lot here. And biomonitoring for exposed residents that want it. We need to be protecting the property values, tourism, fishing industry by sinking new clean wells. This is very important. We know that there's like thousands of these byproducts or lower products of the PFASs, and that the only real solution we see long-term at this point is finding clean wells. That is much easier said than done. That, you know, that is going to be an effort in itself, but that is one of the #1 things that we realized on the Cape has to happen there. There has to be stop training at the academy. It's unbelievable. Some of the people, including the county officials and different ones, are talking about reopening the academy. It's a contaminated site. There's still PFAS on the site. What are they thinking about? I don't know. And we could use some oomph on that, I guess. And there's also, you would think that I don't know if we've tested it coming out of the treatment plant. We also have collect the water in Hyannis, one of the few areas on the Cape, and it goes to a treatment plant. And the thought would be that the sludge and effluent from the plant should not be recycled, land applied, ground injected, or ocean dumped. You got to test it for the PFASs, but you certainly, how you dispose of that's going to be very important. And we think to develop a health protective regulation to include all PFASs. That's what we need. And I wanted to thank the EPA for allowing exposed communities to speak tonight. I know you're asking, how do you people think we're going to pay for this? When I was a kid, my mother always told me, if you mess it up, then you clean it up. Make polluters pay. And I'm going to announce the next speaker, who's Jillian Lane from Greenland, New Hampshire. Thank you very much.
So just one word, we are trying to keep on schedule, and they've been great presentations, and Jillian is going to keep us right on time.
I timed it, I practiced, I locked my kids out of the bedroom. I'm pretty sure I got 10 minutes here. Just need to find the thing. Okay. So thank you for having us here tonight. This is an amazing opportunity to tell you about the Coakley Landfill Superfund site, which is in Greenland, New Hampshire, also partly Northampton, on the New Hampshire seacoast, with a population of about 3,892. And so you can see the red box, right? That's Coakley Landfill, about 26 acres. Over here to the east is Rye, about 4 miles away is Rye Beach. To the south is Northampton. And then both north and west is Greenland, New Hampshire. This is my home, a 76 home development, less than a mile away. Parts of it are about 3/4 of a mile away. Okay, I'm responsible for this? Yes. Okay, so we moved to the New Hampshire seacoast in 2010. My husband and I decided that we wanted to raise our daughters close to extended family where I had grown up, and we found a beautiful wooded lot. We built our dream home, and we were thrilled. And then in February of 2016, a double pediatric cancer cluster was detected on the seacoast of 2 very rare pediatric cancers, RMS and PPB, in a 5-town area that was that Coakley Landfill is centrally located in. And so I started reading everything I could as a concerned parent, and under an online article I saw a comment, quite simply, Coakley ? And so I started researching Coakley, and what I discovered sent my heart into the pit of my stomach. And less than a mile from my home is a toxic waste dump so highly contaminated that it was listed to the EPA National Priority List for Superfund sites. A brief history of Coakley: it was originally a sand and gravel operation, left with a big hole. The owners decided to fill it up, so they applied for a permit, and the landfill was operational in 1972. In 82, Coakley began accepting ash from the refuse to energy project over at Pease Air Force Base, which was used by Pease, but also several seacoast municipalities. There's about 50 feet of that ash on top of the landfill to this day. The first complaint was in 1979 regarding leachate breakouts in the area surrounding the dump. This investigation from the Bureau of Solid Waste Management led to the discovery of drums indicative of cyanide waste. The second complaint was in 1983 when residents of Lafayette Terrace, which is directly adjacent to the site, began noticing foul odor in their water and a foul taste. as well as standing in their laundry and a multitude of illnesses within their families and their community and their neighbors. Testing of their wells led to the discovery of VOCs which were known to the site, and expanded testing detected this contamination in parts of Northampton and Rye. Municipal water was piped to all of these affected communities. The only community that does not have municipal water directly near Coakley Dump is Greenland. So in '86, Coakley Landfill was listed to the MPL for Superfund sites. In 1999, the dump was capped, and every 5 years, the EPA conducts a 5-year review of the remedy, which is natural attenuation with monitoring for the VOCs, which biodegrade naturally over time. We are here today to talk about PFAS, a chemical we all know is persistent and will not biodegrade. And so this is when my neighbors and I got to work advocating for ourselves and for our community to gain access to abundant and safe municipal water for our families. And we formed the Greenland Safe Water Action. So I began attending every meeting that I could to better understand the situation. At the original cancer cluster presentation by New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, many residents attending wanted to know what the department had to say about the potential environmental impact from Coakley Dump. To our surprise, there was no mention of Coakley in their report to the public. Former Governor Hassan formed a pediatric cancer cluster task force, out of which a subcommittee to investigate Coakley was formed, largely a result of public concern, including those families directly impacted by these cancers. Mindy Mesmer chaired that subcommittee. I served as a community representative. An early recommendation from that resulted from the work an early recommendation that resulted from the work of this subcommittee was for Coakley to be tested for PFAS, since Pease Air Force Base utilized that dump and was highly contaminated with these compounds. And as you can see, in June 2016, PFAS were detected on site, and monitoring wells by the PRP Coakley Landfill Group levels were over 1,000 parts per trillion. Another recommendation from this subcommittee was for surface water testing to be conducted to ensure these PFAS contaminants were not leaching off-site. These requests were not initially heeded by authorities, and after several months, Mindy Mesmer, emphasizing the need for more data, eventually collaborated with Conservation Law Foundation to get donations from the public to conduct this testing. And in December of 2016, the Conservation Law Foundation detected PFAS contaminants off-site leaching into the headwaters of Barry's Brook, which winds through our seacoast all the way to the ocean. New Hampshire DES followed up with their own testing and discovered even higher results, upwards of 1,250 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS, leaching off the site into surface waters. And so this is a chart that shows some of the detection levels in the monitoring wells, and the red ones are bolded because those are pretty shockingly high. Discussions about these detections have always been focused on PFOA and PFOS as an advocate, because that's what sort of counts, because it's under the advisory. But today we're here to talk about PFAS, and we're rapidly learning that the scope of this issue transcends the limits of current health advisory. So let's talk about all the PFAS chains currently being reported by the Coakley Landfill group. They include PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, PFHPA, PFHXS, and PFNA. When I started pulling this information together, I was astounded by the level of all the PFAS detected on site. Most astounding were the detections in GW and W4, with the highest being 2,098.3 parts per trillion. And I can assure you that the impacted community members wholeheartedly care about the 707 parts per trillion of PFH PA detected in that well as that 165 parts per trillion of PFNA detected in GW-MW-9. And as I mentioned in my brief history of the Coakley, the remedy is for the contamination on site to naturally attenuate. Do you know what that means for all of these levels on the screen? They certainly aren't going to naturally biodegrade anytime soon. The expectation is for these levels to dilute and disperse into our drinking water supply. Here's the detection levels for surface water. Again, some really high levels that were shocking today, or over the last week or two when I was putting all this information together. So this data was equally striking. The detections of 2,326.4 parts per trillion outside of the dump in headwaters that go into Barry's Brook in December of 2016 were the start of this. But the latest sampling event by Coakley Landfill Group in September 2017 yielded not only a similar result, but also an additional 2,291 parts per trillion in another location. The impacted community living with this contamination cares about all the PFAS chains detected in these surface waters and the monitoring wells on site. Although they are not currently included in the advisory, there is no question these contaminants pose a public health risk. And so the community has been driving progress at the Coakley site. In light of these surface water detections, it was clear the public should not be accessing these waters. The subcommittee recommended signage be posted warning the public of this risk. And this is a photo of Mindy Mesmer and I posting a sign on our own after months of urging the regulators to take action and not seeing any. Eventually, the sign below is the sign the EPA required Coakley Landfill Group to post, and it's pictured right there. So in the meantime, about 300 homes have been developed with private drinking water wells within a 2-mile radius of the dump in the past 20 years. Many of these homes have heavily taxed irrigation systems. I think about the droughts in the summer, and when I see my neighbors running their irrigation watering systems on their lawns to keep them green in the middle of a drought, and just imagine what the pull is on groundwater. And I imagine the groundwater a mile away from my home under a toxic waste dump that's being drawn from, and it's upsetting. The 1,4-dioxane plume has migrated off-site, and residents are concerned that PFAS plume has or will migrate off-site as well. We currently have residents with detections in the single digits, teens, 20s, and 30s, and we can't sit and wait for our levels to hit 70 parts per trillion before we have access to safe drinking water for our families. This is a map that shows the other development from the subcommittee, which was expanded well testing around the dump. This map from New Hampshire DES, which thank you for sharing, shows those detections from the original sampling event of about 60 Greenland residential wells. Many non-detects were reported, as you can see from the green dots during that sampling event. The non-detect level for PFBS, PFHPA, and PFNA was set at 16 parts per trillion each compound, and the non-detect level for PFHXS and PFOA and PFOS was 8 parts per trillion each. And when I do the math, this means that residents could have had anywhere from 7.9 parts per trillion to 71 parts per trillion of PFAS in their wells and have received a non-detect report. This is not reassuring to the impacted public. The yellow dots depict depictions from additional sampling below 40 parts per trillion, and these represent residential drinking wells that are contaminated by PFAS. They may not meet the health advisory for PFOA and PFOS, but one well in this area with well over 30 parts per trillion of these two compounds has well over 70 parts per trillion when the total PFAS chains are accounted for in their well. The pink boxes highlight the 19 wells, 17 of which are residential, that are being tested by Coakley Landfill Group twice annually through 2018. This accounts for less than 66% of the wells within a 2-mile radius of Coakley and Greenland. This is not enough data to satisfy the residents that our drinking water wells are protected from PFAS. This must be expanded to get an accurate understanding of this contamination problem. We shouldn't have to worry what's in our water every time we turn on the tap to pour our kids a drink of water, to fill a pot to boil pasta, to brush our teeth, and to turn on the hose or the sprinkler for our kids to play in the summertime. It's unacceptable. And so this is a photograph of my filtration system that makes me feel safe living in my home. And it's, as you can see, fairly expansive. And I feel privileged that I have the ability to have that system to keep my family safe. And so this is talking about some of the challenges we faced. In a letter to state reps, Mike Wimsatt states, quote, New Hampshire DES believes that actions need to be implemented at the site to provide additional removal or containment of contamination in order to mitigate these surface water quality impacts. In the long run, this will be the most reliable way to limit exposure to site contaminants via the surface water pathway. Days later, at a task force hearing, EPA issued an addendum to the latest 5-year review that stated the remedy on site is protective of human health. Imagine the confusion among community members working tirelessly to advocate for ourselves and our neighbors living around Coakley. We have been living with PFAS contamination for 2 years that we know of. Seeing those detection levels from the monitoring wells makes me wonder, it makes me feel like I'm looking down the barrel of a gun, waiting for all of those parts per trillion to disperse to our drinking water wells. We can't wait another 2 to 5 years for more groundwater flow studies. The known surface water contamination must be remedied now, and we need more data, as I discussed. And so these are some action items that we came up with as a community. We would like the EPA to compel Coakley Landfill Group to provide impacted residents with access to safe, abundant water, compel the Coakley Landfill Group to install an effective remediation system at the Coakley site, ensure that the PFAS maximum contaminant level that the EPA committed to at its PFAS Leadership Summit in May is as strong as possible. It should be significantly lower than the current 70 parts per trillion and include all of the chemicals in the PFAS family. Compel Coakley Landfill Group to expand residential well testing to every home in a pathway determined through collaboration with USGS, with tests performed by an independent body. And compel Coakley Landfill Group to install and maintain filters at every home within 2 miles that request them and at nearby schools. We need filters to be able to trust the water that comes out of our tap, both in our homes and at school. And so that's our story in Greenland. And I thank you for your time and your attention, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Try really hard not to screw it up. Ooh. Arrows? Arrows. Okay. Ooh. Arrows. Hi, I'm Kristen Mello, and I'm from Westfield, Massachusetts, which, if you do not know, do you know in Massachusetts, the line between Mass and Connecticut, where that little divot is that nobody knows about? We are one town north of the divot, so now you know exactly where we are. And if you come to visit Westfield, you will meet General Shepherd downtown, right at our town green, and you will see, I don't know if you know them, black squirrels, which are not common everywhere, but evidently Frank Stanley Beveridge brought 2 mating pairs back to Stanley Park in Westfield, and since like 1950s, they've just been populating western Massachusetts. This is also a map of Westfield. This is an EJ map, just like the one from Cape Cod. You'll notice, I don't know if you can see, right here, right in between them, there's a river that runs through it, and it separates the town north and south. It's called the Westfield River. We'll be mentioning that later. Okay, so now you're all caught up. Okay, so PFAS in Westfield, we have an Air National Guard base up there. So Westfield is in the Pioneer Valley, and we're a town built across 2 rivers, and a long, long time ago, before there was PFAS, a glacier receded through there, left all this sand and gravel, and so everything in our town that's not a hill or a mountain has aquifer underneath it. It's just this big bed of sand and gravel, holds rainwater really, really well. It also, it turns out, holds contaminants really well. So in the early 40s, 50s, when they started fire training at the Barnes Air National Guard Base, it wasn't AFFF, and nobody thought anything of it. And so when you go back through the reports, you find out that every 6 weeks during the summer, they would do this fire training, and for every fire, they would dump roughly between 300 and 500 gallons of originally waste oil, but then in the 70s, they cleaned it up and it was just jet fuel, onto the ground, and they'd light it on fire. And before it was all burned out, they would put it out with the foam. So we roughly did these calculations and found out that between 75 and 85% of the fuels were burned off. Everything else and all the foam on it soaked down into the aquifer. So it turns out that the aquifer north of the river, everything there, the groundwater flows toward the river. And 4 municipal wells, the only wells that supply the north side of that city where all those poor people live, some of whom don't speak English, a lot of whom are renters, well, all of the wells are in the contamination plume. And it turns out that the fire training started a good 20 years before the 2 wells that were placed 1 mile, less than 1 mile away from the original burn pit, those were sunk in 1977, well after this stuff started going in the water. And so on here are some numbers about what they've found. And just for example, in 2017, in a relatively deep well that's not very far away from our well, the numbers for PFOS alone were 410. And this is water that was coming straight into our taps. So it's not nice. Okay, so what was the official response? Well, for a long time, the official response was nothing. You could see it in the Consumer Confidence Report that came out yearly with some average numbers, and when it listed that there were these strange compounds in it, it was like, oh, they're unregulated, there's no law about that, and they're probably from foam. So it turns out that in 2016, when they had to shut down our 2 wells, when the EPA dropped that number to 70, we found out 6 months before, and they shut down our 2 highest producing north end wells. Those are 7 and 8, the 2 closest to the burn pit. That triggered everybody to start paying attention. So even though this contamination was discovered in 2013, it was 2016 where we all sort of woke up, which did not help the city much at all. So we found out that it was there in 2016, and we started to have conversations about it. And the first conversation after those 2 wells were shut down was, what about the private wells? Oh, there are private wells in town? It turns out there are a couple hundred, and we didn't even have a list of everybody who it was. We couldn't even send out a letter. We had to like cross-reference old file boxes from the health department with stuff that other cities knew, and it was a nightmare. But eventually, the DEP and the city got on the same page. Those are DEP and Department of Public Health, that's Mark Nascarella in the middle, officials that came, and the mayor had this big meeting, and everybody sat down to talk about how they were all working together. And the map on the side is the DEP map of the 1-mile radius where they were going to test the wells. We were using 20 parts per trillion as non-detect at the beginning of that. Now it's down to 2, but the beginning non-detects were at 20. So our response, my slides got a little screwed up. This is community response right here. So our response was to get informed and then to inform others. So the first thing we did was start talking with Shayna at Toxics Action Center, who helped us birth RAFT, which is Westfield residents advocating for themselves because nobody else was. And we got educated at the conference at Northeastern, and then we had a little panel ourselves. We pulled all those educators into Westfield to start talking to people. And they brought slides, and they brought peer-reviewed literature, and it was good. And then we got a little mad. So our city owns the property under the base. It's not state land, it's not federal land, that's city land. And the city is responsible to clean it up. Because the Air National Guard is no longer a part of something called DERP, or at least they can't access the money in DERP. And they're actually in NDAA 2019, the New York senators have put in an amendment to help the National Guard access that money for state-owned land. But that doesn't help Westfield because we are city-owned land. So if you know, please ask your senators to fix that for me. I've already asked ours. So when we were informed that on top of the $5 million we'd already agreed to spend on this problem, they want another $13 million to spend on this problem, we got upset and we thought they should make polluters pay, not victims. And the mayor has reintroduced the same bond 3 times because it keeps getting stopped, but he still thinks we should pay. And we're not happy at all. So also, as a community response, in addition to getting everybody engaged and everybody informed, we started to speaking to some officials ourselves. And we went to go see Mass DEP when they first floated the idea of making an ORSG, that's Office of Research and Standards guideline for municipal water supplies. They were talking about using the 5 PFASs instead of just the 2, summing to 70 parts per trillion, which they have since adopted. And when we found out about that, we went to have a meeting with Mass DEP, and they said, you know, you should really go talk to Administrator Dunn. And so we sent her a letter, and she said, yeah, come talk to us. So we did, and that's our picture. And we thought that building was uber cool. So, and, I mean, I don't know if you've been there, but it's very beautiful, and we took pictures of that too. So what's our challenge? even if they spend this $20+ million on this filtration system, the sample they used for the bench scale testing does not represent the water in the well. As I explained at a city council meeting, it is as though they built the system for a beer tolerance and are feeding it scorpion bowls. This is not okay. This is the level of PFBS. That little tiny blue thing is the level of PFBS in the bench scale sample. Now, Chris Higgins did this analysis. We trust the chemistry here. But the GAC breakthrough, right, is based on how much short chain PFAS you have going through your water. And they're saying that the system they're building is going to be fine because look, that blue thing, it doesn't have much PFBS. But our water does. And we know it because the DEP keeps handing us the data. We've brought this to their attention, but they feel that their experts, who by the way all work for people who have money to spend on this, they feel that their experts know. So we need your help. We desperately need your help. The mayor won't ask for it. The Department of Public Health has still said nothing. We have been drinking this water for over 40 years. We are on 1 out of 3 municipal wells on the north side. Wells 7 and 8 were taken off in 2016. When the DEP floated the new ORSG, it turned out well 2 was over the limit. So that one was taken offline. 3 of our 4 wells are offline. We're on 1, and it's already within statistical significance of the limit. We need help, and people won't ask for it. So the little thing on the side, if you know your movies, right? The Steward of Gondor also would not ask for help. So we are just trying to light the beacon and get some help brought into Westfield. We need a PFAS-free water supply. There is a reservoir that has a line running into the north end of town. They already have a pipe that goes there. They just need to add a few thousand feet to it, and we could have PFAS-free water. And it's not given to us as an option. We need a legal framework to help make polluters pay. In the absence of an MCL, the ORS guidelines could only help us if we have something called an ARAR. Is that right? I know the Boston people say it without the R at the end, but I'm from Western Mass. So yeah, right? So, but because it didn't go through the public process, we don't know if it's applicable. And so we need your guidance there, and we desperately need your help. And also, why aren't we a Superfund site? Please? Could we be on the priorities list? How does one make the priorities list, and how do I apply? We need PFAS blood testing. We irrigate with this water, orchards with this water, pick your own everything with this water. The cows drink this water. Everything uses this water. We need accurate, standardized, nationally standardized testing for everybody. And we need biomonitoring. We need to know how much is in us. We need to know so we can make accurate medical choices on the way forward with our families. And I just want to say thank you. My biggest thank you, of course, is to you for holding this. And my second is to the Mass DEP, because without them, we would have nothing. The Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has been exemplary with us in terms of giving us the information and answering our questions, and we have called them a lot. They have been excellent. We want to thank the New England Grassroots Environmental Fund, because if it were not for their grant, the Westfield contingency would not be here tonight. And Testing for Peas and Green Cape and Greenland Safe Water Action and Merrimack Citizens for Clean Water, we love you and we thank you for your support and all of your help. And Toxics Action Center, because we wouldn't even exist if you were not in my living room that night, Shayna. And Mary, all your help, like seriously. And the Coalition, because we gained so much information and knowledge and strength from our participation. And because no one else would help us, I would like to thank in advance the UMass Amherst School of Public Health, because together they and RAFT are gonna start the health work that we really need done. And thank you for listening to our story. And, oh, and up next is Loreen Allen from Merrimack Citizens for Clean Water.
This is to change the slides. Arrow. Okay, I'll do that. Hi, I'm Loreen Allen from Merrimack, New Hampshire. I've never done a PowerPoint presentation before, so my fellow residents are probably a bit nervous. Anyway, Merrimack, New Hampshire is an hour north of Boston, for those of you who don't know that. We've been voted best place to live, and if you came there, you'd know why. We have an amazing community, and in March of 2016, as it says in our town, one town, four villages, incorporated in 1750, was really, really challenged by the news that we received. Prior to receiving this news, I have to say, I raised two daughters. I've been there since '85, and in the 4th of July parades, or very hardworking water department, gave out bottles of the Best Tasting Water Award. We really felt good about water, conservation land, protecting wildlife, protecting our rivers and our trails, and everybody really comes together on that in Merrimack. Unfortunately, these substances, as some of you know, are tasteless and rather invisible. You can't spot them. So on March 23rd, 2016, we heard the news that a business in our town that used to be called ChemFab, that was there when I moved to town, I believe in 1985. I didn't really know what they did there, but they were up there in the north end of town. They had changed over to St. Gobain in about early 2000s. So we heard that there was this chemical called PFOA in the water. And St. Gobain broke the news. I guess they had announced it because they were looking closely, because prior to that, they had been found to have contaminated the town of Hoosick Falls, New York. And I think some of you have heard of that. So we have this information meeting in town, and everybody shows up, standing room only, to find out what is this thing called perfluorinated, blah, 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 you know it. So PFOA. So there we are, in the WMUR news, this small town with all these great people, doing what they need to do, trying to get our head around this. So the first thing we find out is, I'm going to show you a contamination map from NHDES that's been tracking data since that point. The map is from, this particular map, because it was a good copy, is May 2017. So this isn't the original map. It's somewhere in the middle of this process because we're in 2018. So basically, this is the area. Merrimack is not the only impacted community. Litchfield, Bedford. This is called the, I believe, Southern New Hampshire Contamination Site. I'm here particularly to talk about Merrimack because that's what I've been advocating for quite some time, along with a group of wonderful people. So the long and short of it is, in Merrimack, we have what's called, I believe, a complex water system. So that means 27,000 approximate residents, 25,500 on what we call public water that historically has come from 6 wells all around town, and it gets put into a system with different holding tanks and blended, and they have to figure out, when to give us more water, less water, drought. So they've managed that for years and years and years. When you look at this map with all the dots, the most dots that you see are private wells. So private wells in Merrimack alone, 21 originally came up as over 70 parts. That was the number that we were using in May of 2016, I believe. And there were 50 private wells, over 20 parts that I had kind of counted at that point. And I said, 20, what's the number? Vermont uses 20, so to me, back then, that was the standard. That's what I did. Also, our public wells, I did an average because some of our wells kind of pair together, and I'm not a water, specialist or an engineer, but so I went a little conservative here. I went recently, wells 2 and 3 average approximately 13 parts PFOA, 4 and 5 averaging 70. Those are the wells 70 and above. Those are the ones that are closed. They closed those in 2016. And wells 7 and 8 averaging a little more than 25, fluctuating around there. So 25,500 approximate water users. We're only talking about PFOA here now. Keep in mind there are other, we all know this, where there's one, there's more. There's more than PFOA in our water. So when you look at this picture and you see all that empty area, I don't want you to think that, as many residents have thought in our town, well, you know, let's see how many dots there really are. The ones to the right are more in Litchfield. The big blue star in the middle, by the way, is St. Gobain right along the river. St. Gobain, you know, is sitting in very close to an aquifer protection zone, which is pretty standard for along rivers and groundwater. So all that empty area in the middle, that's me, that's my neighbors, that's my friends, that's our community members. Those are public water users that in the beginning, you know, when we're told, well, you're under 70, you're safe, and people are nervous, and we're saying, okay, we're under 70. Is that good? Isn't that good? So now we're questioning that. So this particular slide really strikes me. After DES did a presentation over what these chemicals were and what they were going to do, they've been collecting data points ever since. They've done a phenomenal job with data points. DHHS was trying to give some health support. I think they were really out of their element. You know, this is kind of thrown at us, and they're giving us information, and people are coming up to the mic and they're saying, I have this health condition, I have that health condition. Do you think it could be the water? So resident after resident is disclosing health issues that people in New Hampshire don't talk, you know, we're very, very private. And I was astonished at how much people were sharing. And as you can see by these slides, it didn't hit me till afterwards that the review of toxicology, look what it says right there, funded by 3M Company, a PFC manufacturer. At that point, it didn't really hit me. I saw that and I was too busy thinking about what does this mean and what is this stuff. After the fact, when I started, you know, working on this issue, I remembered, wait a minute, those slides were funded by 3M. So when we talk about the health support that we don't have, let's go back to 2016. You know, our original support in Merrimack, which is the foundation that guided us, is a toxicology review funded by 3M. There wasn't much said even that point about the C8 study, 70,000 people. That's been kind of pushed to the side. And as we pushed a little more, you know, it did get acknowledged. So we do know that there were health-associated risks because of that. So as a result of what we didn't know, many, many residents supported each other, guided each other, gathered their own research. When you research this stuff, you can find studies. Back in 2016, you could find NIH studies on PFOA and PFAS in particular. Now we see a few more. So what really bothered me from the start is what I heard people disclosing. More and more people were talking about health conditions of people. So we have a great group of people in town that have been working on the ground trying to get out there and do what we can and raise visibility and give people support information. So last summer we decided to gather our own health data because we realized, hey, I don't think we're going to get a health study anytime soon. Everybody's trying to get their head around the data. This is just a brief first pass data of these conditions. I stuck purely to conditions reported on the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services website. This is what they acknowledged as associated with PFOA exposure. So when you look at these slides and you say the first one is cholesterol, and you're thinking, well, a lot of people have high cholesterol. How do we know that's because of the water? You know, that's a very reasonable question. I question everything. What you don't see, because this data is just basic tally and add it up, because we're not scientists, we're residents, we're real people with jobs and families. In that cholesterol category that was very high, we have 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds with high cholesterol. In the thyroid column, which is very high, we have teens who have had their thyroids removed. We have kids with Graves' disease at the age of 12. And so this doesn't capture gender, age, and all that. So what we thought we would do was we would gather this data. This chart also does not capture many of the cancers in towns. We heard from many people in certain neighborhoods. They talked about neighbors who were struggling. I wasn't going to knock on their doors and say, here's a flyer, would you like to go online and complete this health survey? I couldn't do that. I know we didn't really capture that data, and our goal here was to take this to the state of New Hampshire and say, hey, our residents need access to blood tests because not only is this what we see here, autoimmune, low birth rate, endocrine disruptors, autoimmune, lots and lots and lots of stuff here that we know is a familiar story. Also, they coexist. So this graph takes, the N is 584. So there's 584 respondents. That's their data here collectively. But what you don't see here is the multiple disorders. So when someone has high cholesterol and they have liver enzymes that are off and they have ulcerative colitis and a disordered thyroid and they look perfectly healthy in their age and they don't have in their family, it really does make you wonder. That is what we see, is this combination of many, many things. The majority of people here didn't just get one item. So we gathered this data and thought, we could kind of do this ourselves, but it wasn't that simple. When we went up to Concord, of course, they said, no surprise to me, well, this is very nice, but it's not scientific. I did find out at that point that in August of 2016, the state of New Hampshire asked ATSDR for a health consultation. And I said, well, that's good. Where are they in that process? So I took a little while last summer, and then I found Tara's contact information. I called her about September, and she was very helpful. And as many people know who work in state and federal and things like that, we keep hearing say, oh, yeah, government, it works slow. You guys are used to that, I know that happens, but here we are in a town with not only what DES told us is 15 to 20 years exposure before those 2 wells closed, we have ongoing exposure. We have a company in our town that continues to do business as usual. They haven't changed their business practices at all. So when we look at the goals of the EPA, for this seminar and as you go across the country, I'd like you to keep in mind, I don't know how many years it's going to take to these goals, but we have air emissions spewing out of 13 air stacks at this corporation, and due to the, I guess what's called proprietary blends, they don't have to really disclose, even to DES, what's in there. So DES, my understanding is they're now doing non-targeted testing, which is a fabulous idea. So they have to use state resources. We don't have taxes in New Hampshire, which is really awesome, but resources, money is going into this, millions of dollars that they need to put together what the combination is of chemicals that's coming out of this corporation. That astonished me when I found that out, because I'm thinking here it is between 2016 and 2018 in good old America, where I hear all this stuff about corporations and how much power they have and the money in politics. To me, it was not a political issue in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, we're very much about the environment and our way of life. We all come together on that. So what struck me in all this is that here we have this trust that there are laws there that protect us. And when I find out that our state has to do non-targeted testing and play this guessing game, and they're doing a really good job with these data points. They really, really are. They have more and more and more all the time. So this is a slide of DHHS assistant. We went to them. Many residents who were here tonight started a petition a couple of years ago asking for blood tests, advocated. I think 100 were originally offered. They said, no, that's not enough. So they agreed to do a random blood test sample of approximately 200 residents. It took a year to do it. People were saying, why aren't people responding to this? Well, maybe because every time they turned around, somebody was saying, you're safe, you're fine, the water is good, it was never that high, your average rate was not more than 30. They kept hearing these things, and other people were scared. So when they did this and they put it out to us, what we saw in general is the average MVD water consumer, which is only a sample of 217 and 25,000 public water users. Included in this sample, because it was random, is people who were newer to town, and not many who were around town forever, I'm sure. So a minimum of 2 times what you would expect as the national average. They did find statistical significance for 2 variables, which I thought I'd put up here, as public water consumers who reported consumption of 8+ cups a day averaged 2.5 times the national average. So now we go up a little. And consumers within 1.5 miles of St. Gobain have 3 times the national average. What's interesting there is that tally was about 34 people, and still they had statistical significance. So that caught my interest, and then I said to the state, well, hey, DES follows data points. When they find data, they expand data, and they keep going till they determine, the scope of this. So how about DHHS, we do the same, and you say, within this area we're finding 3 times the average. Let's do targeted sampling in that area. We were told there wasn't money and it can't be done and all of this, so nothing happened there. What they did do, based on our concerns, is they did a cancer incident report. They determined, based on this report, 10 years from 2000 and whatever that says, I don't have my reading glasses, but to 2014 was the ending date. So they find, this phrase comes up through the whole report, not significantly different. Well, we have categories of bladder cancer, liver cancer, thyroid cancer. There's 5 or 6 of them that by this point, this is this January we get this, that I'm thinking, these are very, very familiar to me and to many, many residents who've been reading and researching, guiding each other, supporting each other, giving their time to fellow residents, going and speaking, and very, very informed. So it's only up to 2014, and many, many people in town felt it really, really doesn't capture reality. Cancer, that being said, is a very scary word. I've been called a fearmonger. I've been called a liberal activist. It doesn't really faze me. I've been a clinical social worker for 20 years. I've been called worse than some of my mandated clients, so it's not a big deal. But really, we as a community are kind of alone with this. We have a water department who did their job. They followed the law. We have a town that took the advice of whoever the experts are who is guiding us. And what I really would like to see personally for Merrimack coming out of this is, if you looked at that phenomenal, DES mapping, and I know you guys know, their GIS mapping is like, wow, right? Everybody is wowed by them. It's a standard. So here is a picture of St. Gobain storm drain outfall, 6/29/17. So see that there's the beautiful greenery, and there's just a little picture of how beautiful that land across the river is. So these numbers ranging from PFOA 1,828 parts all the way down to PFBS. So these chemicals, the particular ones listed, tend to show up, in similar proportions in private wells outside of the designated contamination zone. I think you'll hear from a resident later tonight talking about that. So these numbers in June of 2017 were tested again in November and again recently this year. I can tell you the most recent data is higher than this, and we've been in drought. So that's kind of puzzling, So this water drains into a brook, which drains into the Merrimack River. The surface water testing is equally as dire, and this is our, aquifer for when wells 4 and 5 come back online next year with filtration that we hope will be adequate. So if you look at this, all the attention is going to PFOA and PFAS, right? But what I've seen of preliminary research in health is that the new replacement chemicals are of concern. They're equally as harmful and maybe more dangerous to children and women. So I want to remind people that it isn't just the water, it's also the air. I didn't feel comfortable putting a picture up that I have of a corporation with 13 air stacks, but they're unfiltered and they're in business and they are spewing whatever. DES is looking at a pilot program, I believe, to how to measure those air emissions. They've also tested some household dusts in a community right across the street from St. Gobain, and they found this in their interior. So I just want to remind you of some images of some of the folks in my town that did not complete this health survey because they had lost hope. They were very discouraged. They felt that no one was listening, and we as a community support them. And I apologize if these slides are disturbing because they are. This is a little boy in our town who's in the 3rd grade. His name is Max. This is a picture on Father's Day. He's a warrior. He's a hero. We all support him. He missed the first day of school in grade 3. He missed the last day, but he got a lot of days in the middle. He's back and forth from Boston, to New Hampshire, and he smiles and he does toy drives. He has ALL. His endocrinologists say it's environmentally caused. We can't say it's the water, but I can tell you in the areas of town that have more health impact, those are areas that are getting more air exposure, and they're further away from Saint-Gobain, as we would guess. Here's another slide of an amazing mom whose son was diagnosed in October 2014. He's 25 years old. I won't read every bit there, you can read it, but I will say that her last bit is, I have many unanswered questions, and so does my son. How many people have to suffer before something is done? I think that's a phrase that many, many people in Merrimack that would resound with. And there are people who feel that they're fine, you know, who aren't that concerned, or maybe it's scary to them. But the unanswered questions, the only way we can answer those is to take the health data. We can do that. We have the best labs, I've been told, and the best resources anywhere here. So we need to get that health data mapped. Even if we send out a survey and people fill it in and send it in, you know, we need to get that health data mapped along with the exposure map, because we have the exposure, we have the data points. That health has to go under there. This is a picture of a dear friend of mine that I met last year, talking about back in May when we didn't have a seat at the table. It says, we need a seat at the table because my daughter should not have to do a cancer run for me. I would like to keep my body parts intact. She has a great sense of humor. That's your scan there. Kidney tumors, most recently in 2016, 2 diagnoses and 2 treatments of kidney, lymphoma, autoimmune, various other things. No family history, as you hear from people over and over and over. Many folks who have health struggles are very puzzled as to why. So it's air, it's soil, it's water, it's a whole list of PFAS. It's about 9 of them of concern in Merrimack. Of course, they do not show up at such high quantities in our public water, but they do in private wells, not 1,800 in private wells, but numbers that are very, very alarming. And now we have the new science coming in. It's validating the studies that we've all seen. And I just want people, my intent today was to really go for the health, because I want to put some faces with this. The numbers are great, the stats are great, and the science is great, but we're people. You know, we're people also, and there's lots and lots of people with autoimmune and endocrine disruptors and many, many things at very, very young ages in our town, and their voices have to be heard and not forgot. Thank you.
So we are running a little bit late, as everyone knows, and we're going to take all of David's time here so we can get back on schedule. So he will be. So we're going to have. We are going to have our break after David. Well, we're going to take 15 minutes. We're a little behind. I know there's going to be a food truck outside, but don't leave yet until we hear this next presentation, and then we'll be back afterwards for the open mic. So.
Thanks to everybody. I think it's entirely appropriate and deeply unsettling that Bennington is here to present right after Merrimack. The story of Merrimack is a story of a failure of what happened coming out of Bennington. The ChemFab facility, as some of you know, started in Bennington. Our local reporter who's here tonight wrote a masterful investigative report of the history of that facility. Jim Thrain, and we're so glad to have you here tonight to report on this conversation, this summit. Throughout the 90s, local residents complained endlessly of the headaches, the bloody noses, the inability to breathe when outside because of what was being emitted at the ChemFab facility. The ChemFab facility specialized in Teflon fabrics, and they accepted delivery of PFOA by the truckload weekly as a surfactant in the manufacture of those Teflon fabrics. Residents have often described a blue haze that settled over the valley and the village from the ChemFab facility. For years, residents complained about that facility and the emissions of that facility, and the state did very little. Finally, in the 2000s, the state began to pay attention and began to ask ChemFab for more details and more information on what exactly was coming out of its stacks, and if there could be better sort of technology or strictures put in place to limit the emissions of that facility. And what did ChemFab do? They closed down and they moved to Merrimack. In so many ways, I think this is the story of some of our structure of environmental governance, which is often a kind of whack-a-mole thing, where we begin to try to regulate one thing and they move somewhere else. This is the story of Bennington and Merrimack. Bennington began to respond, Vermont began to respond, and the facility just moved over the border to New Hampshire. The reason there's a problem in New Hampshire is because of the unevenness of our current structure of regulating some of these problems. This is also present with the Gen X, right? We've begun to move forward with PFOA and began to sort of put better and better guidelines for PFOA, and what happens? We tinker with it and redesign it, and now it's Gen X, and it's a different kind of chemical. We need to begin to have, I think, uniform, rigorous standards and enforceable regulations around these issues that hit both all of our communities, all of our places, and the family of compounds. And I think that's so urgently needed today. So apologize for the brief aside, but I just thought I had to comment on the Merrimack and Bennington being on the stage together. It's such an unsettling thing, entirely appropriate and deeply unsettling about our current structure of governance. So my name is David Bond. I come from Bennington, Vermont, and I want to thank Alex and Peter and Jim for inviting Bennington out. Sometimes Bennington feels on the very outer edge of Region 1, and we're always happy to come and participate in these gatherings. We have been dealing with PFOA since 2016, when it was discovered right after Hoosick Falls, extensively across our community. My wife and I purchased a home that same year and had just decided to make Bennington our home. And we had what we thought was a perfect sort of place to live and a perfect community. And suddenly it was revealed to be contaminated with PFOA. PFOA is on my property. It's all across my soil. I have a natural spring on my property that has it at 400 parts per trillion. It's in a wetland on my property at 100 parts per trillion. It's in the soil extensively. And I feel lucky because I'm on the public water supply. And I have neighbors very close to me that have water in their private well at 2,000 parts per trillion or 3,000 parts per trillion. Extremely alarming and unsettling levels. I'm going to say, in our amazing community, we've seen this discovery of PFOA, this very alarming discovery of PFOA, turn hard work and modest hopes of so many families into a toxic nightmare. Children are afraid of drinking water. Gardens tended for years are now abandoned. Pregnancy is met with tears and trembling uncertainty. There's a strange normality of disclosing your blood levels and the worrisome future that such facts now herald. It's shocking how often those blood levels become a kind of identity, like a cell phone number or an email address that's regularly part of who you are and how you talk to people. I often hear the task of the environmental response to PFOA described in this way. The goal is to make communities whole again. With PFOA and the whole perfluorinated compounds, I'd love to know more about how the EPA plans to make our communities whole again. More specifically, I'd like to know how the EPA will support the work being done by state agencies and municipalities and local residents to rebuild their lives and safeguard their environment moving forward. I don't think this is an easy thing. In so many ways, I think perfluorinated compounds pose a new set of questions for us that we really have to face up to. They don't fit the script of other kinds of toxins. And we need to sort of have really good science that faces up to the complexity of the issue and robust regulatory responses up to the task of confronting them. PFOA's remarkable inertness in soil and groundwater, the sprawling extent and multiple mediums of its contamination plume in groundwater and soil. And I think soil is sort of an absent topic right now that I've heard so far, and I'd love to know more about soil levels. Soil in our region seems to be an unexpected reservoir that's coming to hold so much PFOA that will continue to contaminate our groundwater for generations to come. How are we going to deal with the soil? Other alarming things about PFOA, its uptake into plants, animals, and our bodies, and the infuriating subtlety of its toxicity, which happens at such minuscule levels and over the course of decades. And it's such a tricky topic to begin to understand, let alone try to live with and explain to your family and your children. So I'd like to hear more about the plans EPA has to work with us in our communities to make us whole again. And that, I think, has to confront and face up to the real complexity of what's going on with PFOA. And not just to ensure that our drinking water is clean, an urgent and absolutely necessary thing, but also our farms, our lakes, and our homes. So Along with being a resident of the community, I also teach at Bennington College and have been involved in a community response to the discovery of PFOA from the beginning. This project, supported by the National Science Foundation, has enabled Bennington College to open the doors of our science classrooms to this local environmental problem. This has happened primarily in two ways. One, we've put together a new science class that reviews the complicated chemistry, hydrology, and public health concerns around PFOA. We've offered this class every spring term, and it's open to the public and free of charge. When communities discover, like ours discovered PFOA in the groundwater and in the water and in the soil, there were so many questions the community had and they didn't know where to turn for good information. We at the college got together and thought, you know, what do we do? Well, we teach. And so we decided that we would put together a class that would be open to the public and we would review the chemistry, the hydrology, and the public health concerns around PFOA for the community. And we've had that class, we've offered that class 3 times. It's been packed every time with mothers, with teachers, with elected officials, with local journalists, and with a number of local community members who really want to understand what's going on. The other thing we've done with our project is we've also sent out teams of science faculty and students into the local communities to produce independent data on PFOA contamination in conversation with community questions. So we've done a lot of things like, is there any PFOA in the maple sap? We tapped 2 trees about a half mile and then a mile from the ChemFab facility, and we found PFOA in the maple sap in both of them. A lot of residents had questions about the water coming out of the kitchen faucet. When the state comes to test the water, the filtration system often goes in the basement where the well comes into the house, and the filtration system goes right where that water comes into the house. People don't drink their water in the basement. They drink the water at the kitchen faucet. So a lot of residents were asking, you know, if we had PFOA in our water for decades, is there any residual buildup that's still in my kitchen faucet, and is my kitchen faucet safe? So we tested a number of kitchen faucets, the highest levels we could find in the wells across the community, and found non-detects in all of the kitchen faucets. So happy to report that there doesn't seem to be any residual PFOA in people's water pipes. We've also looked at variation of levels. A lot of residents, the decision to get a filtration system or not is determined by what the initial reading of PFOA is. We want to know how stable is that initial reading. If so much is riding on that first test that people get, how stable is that number? We reviewed, Vermont generously gave us their database, and we reviewed it, and looked at people who've been tested more than once over the course of a year, and found a tremendous amount of variation in the levels across the course of a year in single wells. The average was about 24% variation. We tried to figure out, is it uniformly going up or down? No, it was totally scattered. Does it have a spatial logic? Is a plume moving in one direction and it's moving up on one side and moving down the other? There didn't seem to be a spatial logic. It just seemed to be that there's a tremendous amount of variation in individual wells from one test to the next test. This raises lots of questions for us when health guidance levels are used as a cutoff of whether a family gets a filtration system or not. If there's a lot of variation in what those levels are over the course of the year, we think that there should be sort of more generous interpretations of that health guidance level as a determining level of whether somebody gets a well or not, or a filtration system or not. And we've also, yeah, that's what I was going to say about our project in science. So we get together and we sort of take questions from the community and try to produce independent data around them. So I asked a bunch of residents before I came out of things they'd like to share and some insights we have and concerns we have as a community. And I wanted to spend the next few minutes very quickly running through some of them. So first, Bennington is about 7 miles from Hoosick Falls. And one of the things that we've seen and witnessed over the last 2 years is a real disjuncture between how the state of New York responded to the discovery of PFOA in Hoosick Falls and how the state of Vermont responded to the discovery of PFOA in Bennington. So many of the families in our communities are deeply connected to each other, and the differences in how the state responded was vivid and apparent to everybody. And there was a real disjuncture and an uncomfortable one about how those two states responded. And I think I'd like to suggest that perhaps some of these differences, especially the comparison, might be instructive of how we think going forward of how we might respond to this. I think it's fair to say the state of New York fumbled the response to PFOA. They delayed responding long after the evidence demanded it. They confused residents with an uneven response to PFOA. Some residents got a filtration system no matter what their level was. Some only got the filtration system if their level was below the EPA level. And New York State also collected a tremendous amount of environmental and health data from residents, but has not been transparent about disclosing what they've found and if there's any alarming trends in the data they've accumulated. In contrast to that, I think Vermont has been excellent. The state of Vermont, and the Vermont DEC in particular, has been present in the community, transparent, and extremely effective since day one. Vermont's response, I think, is a model for other communities and other states looking at how to respond to this. The governor was in our community within 24 hours of the discovery of PFOA in our community. I was at that meeting. The governor sat with the community until every question in the room was answered. He was there for about 4.5 hours and sat talking with residents until everyone had their question answered or had contacted somebody who would be in touch with them about their question. It was a remarkable meeting. Vermont DEC has been constantly in our communities. Indeed, many of my neighbors and friends know the Vermont DEC folks they're on a first-name basis, and they call them and talk to them regularly. Two things I think are really useful that I want to sort of collect about what Vermont has done that might be useful about thinking about how to respond to PFOA going forward. First, Vermont was able to find a new clean water source for impacted residents fast. The public water system has been detected free of PFOA, but there were hundreds of homes on private wells with contaminated levels, high levels of PFOA. Today, only 2 years after the discovery of PFOA in Bennington, we have a $20 million water line extension to all of those impacted homes already underway, all of it paid for by Saint-Gobain, the responsible party. The project to hook up 200 homes to the public water system with major construction is already complete, and all of those homes will be hooked up to clean water by the end of the summer. That's for Area 1. There's another Area 2 that's still in sort of a legal limbo and under debate, but I think it's remarkable that the state of Vermont got those 200 homes hooked up to a clean water source that fast. And I want to applaud the work that they did to make that happen. The second thing I think that Vermont did really well that we could learn from is that right after the discovery of PFOA, Vermont DEC set up a designated website for the community that became a kind of centralized hub where they regularly disclosed all of the information they had. They sent regular updates to folks on that website, and they sort of constantly were sort of giving everyone everything they knew. That website was rich in information for communities. It included community-specific information, health information, updates on the investigation, and a tremendous amount of data on PFOA in each community, and who to contact if you had any questions for each community. Vermont also organized a monthly email that gathers together all new information about PFOA in your community and emails to every community member who wants to be on that list. Any resident can join the group, and it goes out each month. Such centralized and routinely updated and distributed information helped make residents make informed decisions about this very difficult issue in our community. And I think in those two things, Vermont's DEC has done an excellent job. The other concerns I got from the residents, I'll go through very quickly, is one, the Atsdr report, and I'm very happy you all are here today. Every time the health guidance level or minimal risk level moves down, a number of households suddenly find themselves that thought they were safe, suddenly find themselves in an alarming area. The trend line seems clear to me. Every new report seems to lower the level. If this trend line continues, we should just, if you have PFOA in your water, you should get a filtration system. Whether you're a public water system, whether you're a private residence, if it's detected at all, you should have a filtration system. We have so many homes in my community that were told they were below the first level, so they didn't get a filtration system. 2016, you're below the level, you don't get a filtration system, only to find out now it might be 11. And actually, for those 2 years, you maybe were in an alarming place. This is unacceptable. If the trend line is clear, that every new report lowers it a little bit, let's just cut to the chase and have a common sense response. If it's in the water, you get a filtration system. The last two things, and I'll be done, is that As everyone may be aware, New York State started getting its act together recently. Attorney General of New York State, Barbara Underwood, filed a lawsuit against the manufacturers of PFOA and PFOS. Not just the polluters, those who are using it, but the manufacturers of it, for the costs involved in cleaning up contaminated sites. Drawing on well-known disclosures from lawsuits that the chemical manufacturers like DuPont and 3M knew of the risks and toxicity of PFOA and PFOS for decades and criminally decided to bury that information and continue to market and sell their products as benign, this lawsuit begins to advance a way to recoup the tremendous costs of cleaning up the mess. I would ask the EPA to recommend to the Department of Justice that they advance a similar lawsuit. Cleaning up our water is going to be an extremely costly endeavor. And I think it's going to take not just the people who are using these chemicals, but those who are manufacturing them beginning to take responsibility for the problems they knew of and continue to sell that product. States, municipalities, and residents should not bear the burden of cleaning up our water. Those who cause the problem should. The last issue I had was the medical monitoring. So many people in my community really want a more forceful sort of structure for medical monitoring, long-term medical monitoring of our community to see if there's anything we should be concerned about and to have a quick response and a robust response if there is. Those are my comments, and thank you so much again for having the opportunity to share them. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much to Elena, Stephen, Jillian, Kristen, Loreen, and David. And we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back for the open mics. And I believe there is a food truck outside still. But let's be back here. 15 minutes means 7:20. Thanks.